Building a live service game such as Tom Clancy's The Division comes with all sorts of challenges. Ensuring the game is stable for players in a variety of online connections, handling the different ways players move through the world, and exploring interactive systems and gameplay challenges. But more critically, ensuring the game plays as expected so that players are not getting frustrated because world events don't trigger or missions don't register as complete. Well, this is most certainly a challenge for quality assurance and testing teams. As the scale and complexity of these games increase, the workloads of QA teams will explode in scale. And that's where artificial intelligence can help not just create in-game functionality, but change how the game is being developed. I'm Tommy Thompson, this is AI in Games, and I'm going to take a look at the secret AI players that playtest Tom Clancy's The Division with insights from Philip Dunstan, the lead AI programmer at developers Massive Entertainment. I'll be looking at the custom AI bots that are deployed to assess specific parts of the game and how the first game's post-launch DLC changed how the game would be tested moving into The Division 2. Tom Clancy's The Division has not one, but two types of bots that are used to help test the games of the franchise: the server bots and the client bots. The server bots, as the name might suggest, run natively on the server and don't interface with the game like a player would. As I'll explain in a minute, these bots behave completely different from real players and are designed to stress test the limits of the Division's servers. Meanwhile, the client bots run as if they're playing a build of the game client side. They assume control of the game instead of the player, adhering to all the same rules as a regular player, to a point that all the in-game systems genuinely believe that this player character is being controlled by a human. They don't have any special modifications that allow them to manipulate or cheat the game, and are built to run on any platform, be it PC, Xbox, or PlayStation. Their job is to test how the game actually works for players, testing the main story missions, wandering the open world, and gathering all sorts of performance statistics along the way that help give the developers a stronger understanding of how the game will perform for players when they log into Washington. The demand for these types of tools is ever increasing. As game worlds continue to increase in scale, the number of potential bugs explodes exponentially. Even if you consider both Division games, it's not just the map of Washington DC being larger than Manhattan, but each update to both games not only introduces new content, which might have bugs in it, but it can also change or impact a lot of the existing content in the game, meaning even more bugs because you broke something that was already working. This is only made worse by the reality that live service games need to be updated fairly frequently to maintain player engagement, and these updates need to work, so the word of mouth continues to be strong. This is a problem that exceeds the capabilities of human testers. As more content is being built and the existing content modified, not only does quality control need to be maintained on all the new content, but everything else that already exists in the game. This is thousands upon thousands of play hours, and it becomes increasingly difficult to balance. And sometimes the requirements of testing exceed the number of available staff who can even sit down and play the game.
As you can imagine, we're building servers that host 1,000 players, but it's really difficult to get 1,000 players to all play at the same time. And especially if you want to test whether you can, your servers can stay up for a week, it's difficult to find 1,000 players that can play continuously to test the stability of your server while the game is in such an early stage of development.
As mentioned back in episode 35 of the main AI in Games series, I discussed how the original Tom Clancy's Division runs with what is known as a server bot. It's an AI player that logs into a Division server and plays around in the game. This is being used to test whether or not the game's systems are operating as expected. As Philip explained, while the development team really benefit from this, the actual AI they built was really simple and, well, it cheats a lot.
So, very early on in the Division 1, we had, these server bots that would, connect to a game. They would, they're really stupid. They're not trying to mimic player behavior at all. They just teleport around the world. They find NPCs to kill. They shoot the NPCs, and then they teleport off to a different part of the world. They've got God mode turned on, so they can't be killed, and they just do this continuously. And then every now and then they disconnect from the game and reconnect, or they group up with each other into co-op sessions and they disconnect. So we're testing our ability to group players, to create all the different phases for the players to join and disconnect, and then surprisingly, we get extremely accurate performance metrics out of these bots. Their performance metrics actually very closely matches the type of metrics we see in players, even though they're not trying to play like a player.
Well, gee, that's kind of depressing.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had those in Division. We honestly would not be able to have shipped a stable Division 1 or Division 2. I mean, Division 1 and Division 2 were both, extremely stable games, considering how many players we had, after launch. I mean, if you look at this last year type thing, the number of significant, downtime causing issues we've had has been, extremely low. And we're able to do that because we're able to test it to an extent that we're satisfied with, through an automated method.
Oh shit, I think this thing's gonna...
While the server bots were conceived from the very beginning, the client bots are a different story altogether and emerged from an interesting problem during the development of the first Division. But not at launch, rather with the second DLC update for the game, the Underground. The Underground opens up a whole new game mode in the Division, accessible from the basement of your base of operations, the James A. Farley Post Office building across the street from Madison Square Garden. In the Underground, players would complete procedurally generated missions comprised of different enemy factions hiding out in the tunnels underneath New York. And this is where it introduces a new problem. Unlike the rest of the Division, if a mission is going to be procedurally generated, how do you test each possible permutation to know it's going to work?
The Underground, because it is procedurally generated, had a sort of a problem which had been unique we hadn't had it up to that point. Up to that point, we'd been able to test whether a level could be completed by having, QC, like a tester, run through that level and see if they could complete it. And we have, a large, test team at Ubisoft that is constantly playing through the levels, and that worked, perfectly fine for, the launch of the Division and for survival mode. For Underground, suddenly we had hundreds of thousands of different variations of the level. And it no longer became possible to test this manually. In fact, we had a technical problem at the time as well, where our nav mesh generation wasn't consistent enough that one time when we generate the nav mesh for the Underground level, a mission, one of the variations might be playable. But then later on, when we regenerate, if someone had moved some props around, we got an entirely different nav mesh, and we may have had a nav mesh breaker in that subsequent generation. And so it became not just impossible from a practical sense of how many testers you need, but just from a is this feasible at all? Wasn't actually even feasible at all to manually test.
The client bots were headed up by one of Massive's partner studios working on the Division, Ubisoft Reflections. As mentioned earlier, the team opted for the more challenging task of creating an entirely new system where the AI players are not based on the existing AI archetypes. Instead, they're a custom-built AI layer that directly controls the player's inputs. This helps keep all the development of these tools isolated from main enemy AI, but as mentioned, it means every system in the game genuinely believes that a human player is playing the game. The system was subsequently interfaced into the debug console and tools, allowing for a variety of game actions to bypass the controller layer and be processed by the player character. This means that just like a human, the actions it's trying to execute only work if the current game state permits it. One of the first priorities for the bots was to test navigation mesh coverage. Navigation meshes are the data structure baked into a level that tells AI characters where in the world they can move around. Without a working nav mesh, no friendly or enemy AI would be able to walk around the map. Hence, if any of it is broken, this needs to be identified immediately for designers and programmers to test. In addition, follow bots were then built that allowed for AI players to follow human ones, once again checking how AI characters might be able to use the navigation mesh to move through complex environments and combat arenas. Plus simple combat behaviours that, while they didn't pay attention to their health or avoiding any hazards, would eliminate targets simply by turning the in-game camera towards an enemy's head and then pulling the trigger. But in time, this scaled up from the more low-level tests of movement space and simple combat to being able to take on an entire mission. This requires a lot more complexity and interfacing with the separate mission system built into the Division's codebase, given it needs to know what the objectives are at any point in time, and naturally these shift throughout a given story mission. This requires a more nuanced process, where the bots kill all the enemies in an area, follow the path to the objective marker, destroying specific objects if expected to, and triggering any and all interactions they find within a radius of themselves. With the client bots successfully implemented, they could not only test hundreds of permutations of the underground over a weekend, but they could also run tests overnight on all the main story missions from the first game.
I mean, this was really successful for Underground. It became a really important part of our tool for testing walkthrough breakers, but also actually even more importantly, I think, leading into the Division 2, it became even more successful as a means to test client performance through a level. You could have a whole suite of consoles playing through the level and recording their FPS and their memory usage every night, 24/7, and creating reports from that. And the same through the open world. We could have a group of client bots moving through the open world and finding place in the open world where performance becomes a problem. So they became like a really important part of console performance testing, and they're still being used like that on Division 2.
Transitioning this technology from Division 1 to Division 2 still required a lot of extra work, as well as a change in workflow for both testers and the level and gameplay designers. The progression of missions in the Division 2 is not as linear as it was in the first game, hence the bots might become confused in certain parts of the mission as to how to proceed. So throughout development on Division 2, invisible testing markup is laced throughout each mission of the game by the level designers. It's completely invisible to players and has zero impact on our experience of the game. But the client bots can read this markup as directions for continuing their work. Mission tests are ran nightly and help ensure errors don't creep through into production as they identify mission content failing or game systems not executing as expected. There is also a separate error type for logging when the client bot wasn't working as expected, and the developers strive to ensure that all three of these categories have zero failures in them at all times. In addition, testing the open world with the client bots is used by the QA and tech art teams on the game to identify areas of the world where there are performance overheads, and they report specific bugs once they've looked at the data. As the client bots visit all playable space within the world, they identify areas of the world they got stuck in and cannot return from, as well as frame rate drops that could be due to high poly counts or issues with textures or particle systems in the environment. Lastly, there is also the AI Gym, which is dedicated to testing both the bot's functionality itself, but also ensuring core gameplay mechanics continue to operate as expected. There are still limitations to what these systems can do, largely in part due to the complexities of the game world that would seem intuitive to a player, but the client bot might need some extra hand-holding. And of course, despite this big push into automation, there is still a lot of value gained from having humans sit down and play the game as well.
There's definite restrictions to what our client bots can do. Again, they're not really trying to play like a human. We're not trying to model human play. So they move through the levels on a golden path, a hand-placed level design path of this is how you move through the level, because they need to know how to interact with the doors that they need to interact with, or they need to know that how to interact with the laptop to be able to unlock the next part of the level. So they do require some manual scripted setup, and so they're not really playing like a player would play, but they still provide a lot of benefit even with those restrictions. You still need to have dev testers testing that you can walk out, or that there aren't nav mesh blockers preventing you getting to parts of levels, because the client bot will move along the golden path and they won't test the sort of the areas of the combat space. But at least you get a early sort of smoke test system of saying, is there something significantly wrong with this level that is a walkthrough breaker type thing.
As games continue to become larger and more complex, there is a real need to automate critical aspects of development, be it testing frameworks, batch processes of art pipelines, animation controllers, design tools, and more. All of it serves the needs of the development team. allowing for programmers, artists and designers to focus their efforts on delivering the best game they can. Artificial intelligence is slowly changing the way in which video games are built and is being applied in ways that players would never really think about. The real achievement is by employing AI in these new and pragmatic ways, it helps keep the problems that can emerge in game development manageable. It keeps projects on track and in budget. But it's important that players understand the challenges of how games are made, be it The Division 2, other Ubisoft projects, or the industry as a whole. And that's what these episodes have been all about. Thank you for watching this video on the AI of Division 2. A huge thank you to the teams at Massive Entertainment and Ubisoft for allowing me to sit down and have this discussion, and of course to all my crowdfunding supporters on Patreon who make AI in games a reality. Have a good one, folks. I'll be back.